All right, you guys, this brings us to section 6 of lesson 10 on the Boston Massacre. Now, a massacre, before we get started, is described as the murder of several or many people who cannot defend themselves. So, this event took place in Boston in 1770, on March 5th. Now, the way the stories go is that there was rising tension in Boston during this time. Colonists did not like the British soldiers in their colonies. They didn't like that they had to take care of them. They didn't like that they had to feed them and provide them transportation. Um, but the British soldiers were there because that was their job. They didn't ask to be there. They were it was an order by the king. They weren't paid very well. They were away from their homes. The fact that the colonists were angry with them and treated them poorly made their job even harder and made their conditions in the colonies even more difficult. So as time went on, the relationship between the colonists and the British soldiers worsened, especially in the city of Boston. There name calling and fights on the streets. Colonists would call the British soldiers lobsterbacks because they wear red suits or red coats. So they were just a lot of fighting and name calling back and forth. And on March 5th, that's when the massacre happened and violence erupted in Boston. There was a British soldier who was on guard standing outside the British Customs House, which is where the taxes were collected. Um, and he was standing guard, and a crowd began to gather. They were calling the soldier names. They were throwing snowballs and stones at him. They were just really treating him poorly. Eventually, the guard got other soldiers to come and help defend him, so he wasn't being kind of picked on. And the crowd kept taunting him and the other soldiers, and the crowd of colonists grew even bigger and bigger until they started moving in on the soldiers. One of the British soldiers panicked, didn't know what to do, and he shot into the crowd. And once the one soldier shot, the other soldiers panicked and fired more shots. And within just a few minutes, 5 people lay dead or dying, and several, or rather 6 more, were wounded. The colonists called this event the Boston Massacre. Now, we have to remember that a massacre is the murder of several or more people who could not defend themselves. So this event might not or should not really have been considered a massacre because it was the colonists who started the taunting and the throwing of snowballs and being very intimidating to the British soldier. Now, as stories go, the soldier accidentally fired into the crowd, thinking that his captain had said fire when the captain said he said don't fire. But either way, it wasn't a helpless, innocent crowd that was being shot at by the British soldiers. They both played a role in it. But nevertheless, the British colonists called this the Boston Massacre and spread word about it throughout the rest of the colonies. Paul Revere, a very famous silversmith, made an engraving of it, where you can see on the side of the page, where it showed the soldiers firing at a peaceful crowd, even though that's not really what happened. And word of this event spread across the colonies, angering people all over. And it was for this reason, the governments began to set up an informal committees of correspondence that let one another know what was going on from region to region. Eventually, that committee of correspondence became permanent in Massachusetts, and it became the spot where colonists decided that they were going to unite and begin to protest against what the British were doing, the taxes, the troops, the quartering acts. They wanted to set up an official protest against the British. So the Boston Massacre, although not truly a massacre, was a very important turning point for the colonists who after this event, began to unite together in order to protest against what the British were doing.